Well, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
I'm
Have
doing
you had a good
fine.
Christmas?
Yeah, I had a lovely Christmas. I have all my children are now in their 20s, and they're
Right.
all home right now, which is a real delight for myself and my wife. And that's all I usually want for Christmas is just to see my kids and that they're doing well. So,
Yeah.
um, how about
Did you
you?
manage to get much of a break, or is it the busiest time of year for you? So,
Yeah, it's sort of a busy time of year for me. There's usually double the services and half the work days.
right.
So it's a little strange that way. How about you? How was your Christmas?
I mean, mostly kind of socially distanced. I mean, I've had I've had 2 weeks off work. I'm into the second week of that now. Um, I've not got as much stuff done as I would have liked to in those weeks, but it's nice to have a bit of a break from like the routine of always working from home and not having any sort of break from that in terms of just being able to go to the gym or whatever.
Yeah,
It turns into like that there's no like distinction between like now is rest time or now's the weekend or whatever. It's
yeah,
all just kind of like and that can be quite weird and tough, but
yeah.
it's been nice to just be like, well, there's no work whatsoever for a while now, so just do nothing. But
So what kinds of things are you working on? I see you're online a lot and you're doing a lot of the atheist Christian stuff. What kind of things are you thinking about?
in terms of like career, I'm a software engineer. I did partly due to I don't know if you remember or how much like other of my stuff you've watched about like how I got into Christianity and stuff, but when I was and I think we talked about it a bit last time, but
Yeah,
like I would, if you'd forgot, I would because it was a while ago. I had two snapped ACLs in my knees in my last years of high school,
yep,
and being adopted and stuff as well. My family relationships are a bit weird, so I didn't really have like sort of, I guess, not everyone, but a lot of people, when they're at that time in their life, have, parents who are like pushing them to go to university, for example, and
yeah,
do something like that. Or I don't know, I could imagine in similar situations, maybe the pressures being slightly different. Because I didn't have that, I ended up not really applying to go to uni. Um, and then when I was working, I was like, well, this is crap and not intellectually stimulating.
yeah,
And so I then was like, well, but I can't fund myself to go to university. I hadn't really thought about student loans properly, I guess.
mm,
And I ended up doing a degree apprenticeship, not because I was like, well, this particular subject is what I really love and want to do, but just because it was like, well, at least I can get a degree whilst working.
mhm.
And software ended up being the one of them that was available in the UK. So I did that, finished it last year, and got, I suppose, what you'd call because I've been working full time basically and just going to university on a day release basis. Got my first like normal software job after that, which I started in November of the past year that's just gone.
Okay.
Um,
How
and
do you like that? Do you like it? Do you like the work?
I sometimes I think it's a bit of like, I think because technology is so powerful in our current culture, like you can see how it's really shaped and revolutionized almost every strata of society. Like how we socially engage with each other, how businesses work, how people spend their leisure time. Um, there's this idea that so then the people who make it or engage with it are sort of like this must be this kind of elite, or it must, like there's this idea of software engineers live these people who geniuses in every subject or something, and live in their penthouses, and do their Brazilian jiu-jitsu and meditation at 5 a.m., and then they get on their Google bike to the office. Or yeah,
They're
it's
all
not
Mark Zuckerberg.
right. Yeah, and it tends not to be. I actually view it sort of. I mean, maybe like in the same way that maybe Marx looked at the labor of
Yeah,
people in Manchester, funnily enough,
yeah,
in like cotton mills and things. It's just like that, but glorified at a computer, really.
yeah,
For the vast majority of people, maybe there's a few exceptional ones who run a Google or something like that. But
yeah,
I think it's just, for a lot of people it can be, here's your 8 hours a day or whatever, and you're going to be for the millionth time in a row bashing out this component on a web page or this
Yeah.
thing in a database or whatever. So I mean, some people, when you can get into a flow state, it can be quite pleasant,
Yep.
because just like building anything else, I suppose. But over time, and especially maybe just for my psychology, something, it's just like, why the hell am I doing this? Like, I want to think about what really matters, which is how do words work? Like, no,
Yeah.
it's not that
Yeah.
important,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's, the really important subjects like philosophy, the practical ones.
Well,
But yeah,
well, well. So now you've got a trade, though, and so I mean, there are. I mean, how my channel grew up, I have a lot of people who work in software um, and IT technology, actually, because that was a surprise to me. My brother-in-law is a software engineer, and so I get a sense of that world. But it does seem like you're much more interested in philosophy and
yeah, like that. If money were no object, like that's what I do with my time, basically. So that's one way of phrasing it. Yeah.
do you think you'll get a chance to go to school to do it, or you'd rather just pursue the self-taught thing? Or I mean, because you can learn a lot without going to school,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a current question that I'm thinking about, right? Like, so I've actually got an offer to do a master's in computational neuroscience, and then I thought, well, have I just applied for that subject though? Because it's a STEM subject, it's more prestigious. Like a lot of people will say,
Yeah.
well, philosophy is not practical, and it's you. And I'm like, but again, if money were no object, which one of those would I choose?
Yeah.
And so I have also applied to do a master's in philosophy. Um, Now, whether that is actually, going to be the best use of £10,000 or whatever, I
Yeah.
don't know. But
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I guess my impression from the United States was that I assumed that in Europe the educational systems were more heavily subsidized. Maybe I'm wrong.
in
Um,
in Germany, say, or in Norway, but not in the UK, we had this whole thing where I forget which government it was. I think it was the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition, and the Lib Dems were like, "Oh well, we'll hold them back on these policies," and they didn't. And it became this whole thing of like the Conservatives put tuition fees up. I think I can't remember if it was completely free at the time or it was a tiny fee, and then they put it up to like £9,000 a year for an undergraduate degree. Um, and then it's
yeah.
just kind of risen every year since then, really,
Yeah. That's not
with
cheap.
inflation. Yeah, yeah.
That's it's not as crazy. A
As
lot of
in this,
American colleges can be 30, 40, 50 grand, 60 grand a year, but there's
yeah.
financial aid and,
But
but
it's a
you
bar
don't
to
want
entry, and if you're 18, you don't know what the hell it means
to.
to earn £9,000. Never mind to go into that amount of debt, and yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah, and the parent aspect too is important. There was a young woman that I knew lived quite close to the church. She was raised by her grandmother, and she was smart. She had good grades in high school, and I really wanted to see her go to a 4-year college. And her grandmother said, why, nobody's going to go give you money to go to school, and wouldn't sign the financial aid application. I was just furious. And the grandmother died. And I was like, okay, well now, you were emancipated at 18 in the United States with a situation like this. She's an African-American woman. She can get a full ride lots of places. She didn't do it.
right.
She didn't do it. I had a guy in the church who was willing to, pay whatever she needed. And so that parent piece is a really important thing starting off. But it sounds like you've sort of gotten your toe into the world, and you understand how some of these things work. But I would love to see you, you're young, and I'd love to see you be able to pursue something that you're excited about, because that
Yeah,
makes a big difference.
I agree. I think this was. I mean, like, my girlfriend V was basically, when we talked about this, she said, basically, well, based off of what you've just said about how much you want to do this and how much it sort of
Yeah.
means to you to study philosophy. well, I think that's the option, that you should like just go with that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like, if it doesn't work out, what do you do? You just go back to the sort of job you're in now, I suppose.
yeah, yeah.
Save for another couple of years and go down another route. It's not that much lost.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if you don't have any kids, if you don't really have to, I mean, I'm sure you know how to live cheap. You
Yeah.
just have that sense to you. You're not a guy who's, you know, gonna spend a whole lot of money on silly things. So,
Books. That's
oh, books. Yeah, there's that. There's that. But it's
that's
amazing, you know, it is amazing what you can learn from the internet, and from YouTube, from, I mean, resources that
yeah,
are
that's right.
online. So, so let's, you know, if you're open to it, maybe talk a little bit about what happened in terms of, because I do remember you made a video. That's why, you know, before we had our first talk, a bunch of people, you'd made a video about Jordan Peterson, how you joined a church. Now it sounds like you've had a falling out with that church and falling out with the faith. What happened in there for you?
Yeah, I mean, so much like, I guess from where I'm at now, I would look at a lot of my reasons for getting into Christianity as having been different from perhaps how I sort of identified with them at the time, or how I
Mm,
understood them. So I think um, some of the things that made me go to Christianity was like, like if you watch, I know this is a different type of Christianity, yours, but like William Lane Craig's whole like hope, meaning, and purpose, that
yeah,
like ultimately life without God is meaningless a bit.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that sort of um, existential feeling, and also or as the medical community might call it, depression. I was diagnosed with depression at
Yeah.
a younger age, and I think that sort of or what Jordan Peterson did was like resonate with that part of me.
Hmm.
But then he also made something like Christianity part of the solution to that problem. Like,
Hmm.
here's how you find meaning. And then I guess I identified with the Jesus story in a certain kind of way, like the
Hmm.
idea of the things that I was suffering with in life. It was like, well, that's like picking up my cross and living a certain way. And then going to church, I think some of the beliefs I will have picked up in that group were probably due to like peer pressure or whatever. So like the
Mm,
very first time I went to a Bible study there, I
yeah.
remember talking about like ancient Near Eastern myths, for example, in the Old Testament. And I was like,
Mm,
oh, this is really cool because in like this bit of Genesis or whatever, it's clearly like about multiple gods, but like Yahweh's like supreme. Like, here's how Yahweh's being compared to these other gods that do also
yeah.
exist. And it wasn't for me like literally about this like god of classical theism or something, or the god of John Calvin, is it, that particular church. But I got the impression from the group that that way of thinking was alien or bad or something, like that it wasn't in line with orthodox, like in the sense of like right belief. And so I think over time I just began to randomly accept things to the point where just everything in the Bible was about Jesus. Like historical biblical criticism meant liberal, which meant the same as like going to hell.
Hmm.
um, and there were like a bunch of things like that, as well as there was a ministry trainee at the time who, what now I think his relationship with me was in a lot of ways like psychologically abusive,
Mm,
like where he was sort of pressuring me into certain positions.
mm,
And there were like things that happened, for example, where I was in a relationship with someone at the time, and he sort of um, put pressure on, saying that because I was living in sin,
mhm,
and God didn't want it, that the only option available to us was to get married right now.
mm,
So like I ended up proposing to her when it probably wasn't right, out of like
mm,
hours of pressure from this person.
yeah.
We ended up buying a house, and like that went wrong. And I think he felt a bit threatened because he was the ministry trainee by my interest in philosophy as well. And
Mhm,
so he, in one-to-one sessions with her, convinced her that me studying philosophy was a false idol. And then so when I was like, oh, I'm going to save so I can go to university in future or something, and she was like, well, this is a false idol in front of God, and you're not like,
Was
you know,
she? Did you meet her in the church,
no, I
or did she
actually
join the church with you?
I ended up, yeah, she joined the church with me. I ended up sort of I suppose, and I actually regret some of my interactions with her now, because I probably um, like told her a story about womanhood that wasn't particularly like healthy according to that, like, you know, like that particular framework of like,
Sure, sure.
well, Christ lays down his life for the church, and that's
Right,
like me, the husband,
right,
and here's your place, you know, like kneeling
right.
at the side, and that's what a woman does, and that like I regret that now,
Mm,
frankly, but even so, I guess like that, all this stuff got kind of tied in together, and then he even sort of almost caused us to split up, really, because he convinced her that this was an idol for me. In some one-to-one sessions with her, she then decided after those that we weren't right for each other, kind of thing, and then we were kind of split up, get back together again, and we just bought a house, and there was all the stress of that as well, involved quite a few times. And he actually, I remember I didn't want him involved because I just wanted to talk to her about this
yeah,
decision she was making one-on-one.
yeah.
He wouldn't let us. We were away on like this Christian festival in a place called Keswick. And so he was like, yeah, I know it's really uncomfortable, but we, you know, like, you need to come with me and her and we'll talk about it. And he was like, so we started the conversation with, well, when we're here before God, we know if we repent of our idols, then everything will be okay. And then he basically, you know, framed the whole conversation in terms of, so your idol's been philosophy, Nathan. Now, if you want to be with, I'm not going to say it, but if you want to be with, you know, who I was with at the time,
Yeah.
you know, you're going to repent of this philosophy, aren't you? And you're going to behave like and this looking back is really bizarre.
A little heavy-handed. I mean,
Yeah, to say the least. But I think the interesting thing is, within that church, within their particular systematic theology, for a lot of the things he was saying to me, there isn't like a mechanism to push back against that, in terms of like, you know, scripture's the final authority, right? And there isn't like the verse you can point to
yeah,
that's saying precisely the advice that he's giving is
yeah,
wrong, or
yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, and that's one difficulty that sort of came out of that for me. But then, so a few months after that, then I had a conversation in terms of like my faith journey. I had a conversation with Doug, who's got the Pine Creek channel,
Mhm.
and I was still, I was like, well, if I'm not in this relationship anymore, I've got all this time to do like Christian apologetics, to convert people, you know,
Mm,
to Christianity, stop them going to hell, all that sort of stuff.
yeah,
And that was then how, well, I think it was through Trinity Radio and Apologetics channel that Doug got into the algorithm in my suggested videos somehow,
yeah,
and then I ended up talking to him, and that conversation led me to doubt the reason. I'm not discrediting or discarding that there were like emotional reasons involved as well. Like, I was
yeah,
definitely angry at this ministry trainee and the whole situation that had gone
yeah,
with the church, how it had been dealt with. But then I think intellectually I couldn't, like the fundamental reasons I had for believing, so that basically, to summarize, that it kind of worked for me. Like when I prayed, I got a particular feeling, or when I
sure,
read the Bible and
sure,
you know, I put the name on that, the Holy Spirit. Or I'd say,
yeah,
well, as a reformed epistemologist, I just have this properly basic belief in God, and you know, but the
yeah,
truth is that I wanted to say, when the Mormon comes along and says the same thing,
yeah,
that then they're wrong, they're not justified. But ultimately, it kind of came down to, and so I was like, if I take a step back from this, how can I consistently say that, well, I've got the truth because of that feeling, but actually, Mormon, you're wrong when you reason that same way. And I was like,
sure,
well, I can't do that. And
yeah,
I guess I started breaking down the belief structure from there,
okay,
to a point being angry at Christianity, I think, and pushing
yeah,
back against it trying to find. But I think that was because it was so valuable to me that I wanted to find firm ground. Like I was
Yeah.
pushing back, but I didn't want to like. I wanted something that was going to push back again. And I was like, like every time I'd say something, and so I thought someone was going to like finally like tell me I was wrong or something. I was like, yes, this is great, because I wanted that, but it just kind of didn't happen.
Mm.
And then I guess to the point now, I I don't want to be in like that atheist group or the new, like the new atheists. I think their approach is wrong. I don't think they take I don't think they look at philosophy of religion in the right way. And so I'm quite happy calling myself agnostic, or sometimes I refer to myself as a non-realist Christian, because I'll still read the Bible. I still psychologically identify with the narrative of Jesus or something like that, but I just don't care about, or I do care about the metaphysics, but for what my kind of atheism dressed up Christianity is, I don't care about metaphysics for that. Like I just like I don't care about the end of like a cosmological argument or whatever. It's not even about truth apt propositions in the world. It's literally just like more like cheering for a football team, like yay Christianity, if I like sit in a service and see the way the light comes through the stained glass window or something. But I'm happy just being like, it's nothing more than that, like from where I'm at. So that's a brief detour of everything that's
Oh,
gone
that's
on.
helpful. That's helpful. And I find a lot of people, um, I find a lot of people in that space right now, especially in the UK, which is quite interesting to me. I mean, Tom Holland um, is is someone who obviously wrote, I thought quite a significant book in Dominion, but in a recent interview, he's quite do I believe in God? Well, don't think so, but I want to lean into the story, and so and there's a number of people on the Discord server who are sort of in the same place, that something similar to what you just described. um and I think, and that doesn't surprise me, because again, in my experience, people are not philosophical computers in squishy pink or brown skin. That's not what people are.
Right.
People are relational creatures who, and I'm really I'm saddened to hear what happened with that ministry trainee. And I'm sure in many ways, given the churches get very anxious and energetic about applying their systems to people's lives, and their systems are, often, certain Calvinist churches can be very foundational in that. Well, okay, here's the Bible, and via the Bible we have these doctrines, and you just, it's a certain kind of presuppositionalism, where we've got our presupposition straight, and so you just construct this system, and then the job of the pastor is to, now we're going to apply this on your life, and it's for your own best interest, so we're going to, use all sorts of pressure, and that's, it's a delicate thing to work with people, because there's a lot going on. And so in my experience, um you're often better, at least my approach tends to be a little bit lighter of a touch. Have a conversation, but you're a grown adult in a free nation. um we make choices, and we bear the consequences of those choices, the good and the bad. And the truth is, life is complex in such a way that for all of our choices, there's often good and there's often bad, and we have to figure those kinds of things
Oh, your
out.
audio cut out for me, Paul.
Did it really?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that
Hmm.
was me. Oh, you're back. You're back.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, I was I was recorded on my end. If you, yeah, now it says your internet is unstable. We can, I don't know if you want to record it on your end too. You can, just so
Yeah,
nothing is
sure.
lost.
Yeah, let's
Let
do
me
it.
allow that. Okay. So,
Let me see. I think I'm doing it now as well. Yeah.
okay.
But yeah, it was only the last word of your sentence is something I think that missed
Okay.
off. I just saw
Okay.
that you, like your mouth was moving. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, in my opinion, parenting and pastoring are two very different things. You know, parenting also varies tremendously in terms of the age of the child. I mean, parenting a 2-year-old is different from parenting a 6-year-old. It's different than a 10-year-old. It's different than a 12-year-old. It's different than a 15-year-old. And now all my kids are in their 20s. And I made a comment on my video that I was, so right now living at home, I have my wife and my 2 daughters. And so my wife is very happy because when it was my wife and 2 of my sons, we were watching a lot of TV that my sons wanted to watch. And now we're watching TV that my daughters want to watch. So we're watching The Bachelorette, and someone makes a comment in the comment section about, you shouldn't be letting your daughters watch The Bachelorette. And it's like, they're 22 and 24. I think they can decide if they want to watch the Bachelorette. But churches can get a little tyrannical, and I don't tend to find in most situations that's very helpful. I do know situations where someone is, I know pastors who minister to people who are just getting out of prison or wrestling with substance abuse, and some of these issues, some of those pastors can get pretty direct, and if the pastor takes them into their home, pretty okay, these are the rules of the house. But you know you've it's it you have a brain, you have a conscience, you have a soul. You're going to have to figure out how this stuff works. And some people are more philosophically minded than others. It's we're living in a time of a lot of disruption. And so navigating significant romantic relationships, navigating finance, navigating education, navigating career, this is all pretty complex stuff, and it takes time to work through. So I'm saddened by your story, and I, you know, I know I get people, sometimes church people have a problem with some of the things I say too. And one of the things I often tell people is that I don't get too alarmed when people deconstruct, because I was just actually watching a conversation between Cassidy and Ginger Bill, who are on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, and they're just kind of comparing notes. Bill is from the UK, didn't grow up with any religion at all. Cassidy is from the US, grew up in a very Christian household, but he kind of he doesn't necessarily consider himself a Christian right now. He's kind of exploring those things. Cassidy sort of deconstructed and is in the process of reconstructing. That to me is something I would expect right now, given everything we're going through as a culture, because the faith and philosophy have a very interesting relationship, and historically this is very true. If you read someone like Justin Martyr, an early church father, Augustine, is, for that matter as well, decided to become Christians because they liked the philosophy.
And pears.
What's that?
And pears.
And pears.
Pears. No, the pear tree. The still.
The pears. The pears. Yeah. No, so he was a Manichaean, and he was probably always a Neoplatonist. So the relationship between philosophy and faith is a complex one, and sort of how we have located philosophy in our culture now is this academic discipline. In the ancient world, a philosophy was in some ways a little more analogous to a religion, but again, we have secularity, which I suspect is actually a product of Christianity. Um, that doesn't mean that, the Stoics and the Epicureans didn't have ideas about how to consider metaphysics. They certainly did, but it's a complex business that we're working on. And I think someone in your situation, as a pastor, I would want to see you have some elbow room, explore some things, talk some things through, talk to different people. I don't think putting you in a really narrow stall in order to force feed you what I think is the answer for you is really going to help you, because you live in an age with YouTube and an internet connection and a lot of different people out there with their own positions. And so even though we are formed people and constructed people, I think it's important for you to explore these philosophies and religions and to test them. And part of how you test them is, in fact, trying things on for size. And that's always a difficult process, because we have to make judgments sort of dead reckoning in the moment. But as we go through life, okay, so I made a judgment then. Now I look back months or years later and I have different ideas about that judgment that I made then.
Yeah.
And life is like that. So I'm I'm probably more saddened by your interaction with the church than I am necessarily in terms of, the flags you're putting in right now to say, this is who I am right now. Because, where you are in life, where you are is going to continue to change. And the journey you're on, I think, is a journey of trying to find the truth about the world, trying to figure out, what is coherent, what makes sense. And I think that's an important thing. I don't think that's idolatrous. I mean, it can become idolatrous, and I'm not in a position, I don't know you well enough to make that claim, but uh, to me, just face value, that's not idolatry.
Yeah, I think I by and large like agree with almost everything you said there. Um, just the one thing, and I don't know, you didn't sort of explicitly say it, but in some of these conversations I've had with Christians, it's sort of been as if, the idea is though, like eventually I'll figure out Christianity is true or something. Whereas I think I'm open, like that just might not be the case. It might actually be that following truth to the best of my capacities never leads me to thinking like Christianity is like true in the way that they mean something. And I think I want to stay open to that
Yeah, well,
possibility.
it's not like I think everybody who goes on a quest for truth winds up as a Christian. I mean, Sam
Yeah,
Harris is on a quest for truth. Daniel Dennett's on a quest for truth. Everybody's on a quest for truth, and many don't wind up there. But everyone who's on a quest for truth also looks around and says, most people don't wind up where I am, even as
yeah,
a Christian, even as a Christian minister. There are huge disagreements and conversations within Christianity about all sorts of things. And so
right.
I'm not presupposing your end
Yeah,
point. I'm in my 50s, you're in your 20s. You'll we don't, we don't stop, hopefully we don't stop growing and learning and evolving and changing once we hit 30 or 40. I mean, I've
yeah,
over the last 3 years with my videos and the Discord server and everything that I've done, I've continued to learn and grow. It's also the fact that I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a who's a psychologist, and I was talking about some things, and he was saying, yeah, I mean, a lot of psychologists, we're not even anybody still in their 20s probably isn't even fully differentiated. The world is really big. It doesn't mean, it just means you're in your 20s. someone in their 50s and someone in their 20s has more than double the life experience. And if you're paying attention, if you're thinking critically, if you're asking good, hard questions, hopefully you learn something between 30 and 60. I wouldn't want to see the other
Hopefully.
way around, but it is also
Yeah.
true that what you've what you've done and read and learned in those periods has a cumulative effect, and brain plasticity is real. And so that's why sometimes with some people I'll say, hey, my cake is pretty baked. I know there's a lot of people who are, hoping that if my beard grows longer, I'll become Orthodox, or I'll finally see the light and become a Roman Catholic, or I'll
Yeah.
give up this Calvinism thing because other Calvinists don't behave well. And it's like, I'm probably not going to jump horses, even though I've got plenty of critiques of my own tradition. In fact, I probably have more critiques of my own tradition than someone looking in from the outside, because I just know it better. And I expect the same thing from Roman Catholics and Orthodox and Muslims and Buddhists and spiritual Buddha. I mean, it's just the way life rolls out. So I don't know. I think it's important, so part of what I try to do with people is help them on their journey. And obviously I have a position, and I have a worldview and a perspective on the world that I think is true, but I'm differentiated enough to know that not everyone is going to agree with me. And I actually think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
built into the Christian story, because if Jesus was the Son of God, and if Jesus is who Christians say he is, why couldn't he stand up and make an argument and have everyone simply agree with him? Why was he so obnoxious to most of the people that heard him, that in the midst of a brutal culture war, sworn enemies could agree that the world was better without him? That if the Christian narrative is true at that point, it leads you to ask hard questions about what does it mean to be a human being, to encounter the truth. And it's a messy business. And so certain brands of Christianity that try to lock people in very early and keep them in a very thin corral, I don't tend to have a lot of respect for, because I don't actually find that to be the case of people we read about in the Bible. So check your own source material, Christians. So that's the
Yeah.
genesis of a lot of what I believe.
Yeah. I think it's difficult, right? Because there are certain part parts of Christianity, I think, though, that you would want to say have to be true, or it would no longer be Christianity, right? So say like just something like, well, Jesus existing is going to be pretty important, but like that Jesus rose from the dead,
Yep.
say,
Yep.
or
Yep. Yep.
like that God exists, or so, like these sorts of things are going to have to be um it'd be difficult to conceive, say, in like 1,000 years time, of there being like a Catholic church that doesn't believe that God exists, or that Jesus rose from the dead, or Jesus existed, but everyone just goes and reads their Bible and has a good time or something. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think though, then on those sorts of like propositions, what we do is it well, at least from where I'm standing, and maybe you disagree with this, but I think it's like, well, those central things to Christianity, if I want to know if Christianity is true, I've got to like look at them, investigate them, and see like, can I get to saying that that is true? Does it look like that's where the evidence points? Or like, if I'm looking at like, how can I explain say the data I find in the Bible, or I look at like the argument someone gives for God's existence, how can I explain this data? And then if I evaluate those explanations, which of those is better?
Yeah.
And I think if like for me personally, I'm just not finding that it turns out that like God is, or the God of Christianity is the best explanation of these points. And
Yeah.
so I can see how someone could rationally also conclude, though, that God does work for them. But what I'm doing is I'm going, well, because I'm not forced to a conclusion by the explanation, by God as an explanation doing so much work that like naturalism can't, or something like that. That instead, what I'm going to do is I'll just withhold my judgment on that question and
Yeah.
continue to. Um, but so like I get all the stuff that you're saying, and I completely agree with like I think I prefer a kind of Christianity that allows people that space to like think about these issues and stuff.
Yeah.
But I also think people need to, not something you explicitly talked about, I don't know if you disagree, like people to think about those central claims, like are they actually true? And if they're not true, what does it mean for religion? Like, is there still a type of religion or a type of function that religion serves that's important? And those are the types of questions I suppose I'm engaging with.
Yeah. Well, you had 2 points in there. One was sort of a modernist, evaluate, so here are claims and here is, sort of trying to match things up.
Right.
And and I'm not criticizing it necessarily, but it's important to look at the type of approach we're using in order to make an evaluation. But then you said a second one as well, which was to find what works for me. And those are two things. I can ask
Yeah.
questions about, who is the real Donald Trump? Because in the American political system, there's actually 4 or 5 different theories floating around out there in terms of who Donald Trump actually is. Now, there really is a Donald Trump. And the difficulty that we have is that all of our all of the evidence that we're using to try to come to a determination what the real Donald Trump is all filtered through Medium. And even though Donald Trump is someone that theoretically one could actually go and shake hands with and have a conversation with, then again, having been married to someone for 30 years, you can actually live with someone for 30 years and sometimes wake up in the morning and say, who really is my wife? People are mysterious like that. And so on one hand, the kind of evaluative tool where you're saying, okay, here's evidence, here's what I'm trying to figure out in terms of, okay, and does that match up to the world? Does that picture match up with the world? That's one level of analysis. Another level of analysis is, okay, well, what relationship with Donald Trump really works for me? And obviously, it's not disconnected with the first level of analysis. But, when we started talking in terms of how you're thinking about Christianity, that's more the second level of analysis. And that's, when I hear people like Tom Holland talk about where he's at right now, I hear him on one hand say, I've got real questions about the existence of God or the physicality of the resurrection and
Right.
some of these elements, but leaning into the story works for me right now. And we understand living between those two levels of analysis. And even with the example of a romantic partner or a spouse, your spouse can do something or your girlfriend can do something and you can look at her and think, well, who really are you? Because they do something that surprises you, but that doesn't mean you run out of the house, because we're juggling both of those things, and one tends to be a little bit more abstract. It's not disconnected, but the connection with it is not quite so simple. And so it's not at all. Again, as a pastor, I spend my career watching and listening to people carefully. And one of the most humbling things you very quickly learn as a pastor is you're up there on stage talking to people and or in Sunday school class teaching people. And as a teacher or a preacher, you think that I am going to somehow take the content of my brain and put them in the other people. And they are going to mirror, kind of what you're doing with, here's a portable hard drive. I'm going to take this data, I'm going to put it over there, and they're going to possess it. Doesn't work that way at all. In fact, you can talk to someone who's been in your church 20 years and ask them a fairly basic question, get an answer that says, I never in my life would have asserted that. And I, in fact, think talking that way sends us off on a bad road, but they are a member of my church. They might even be they might even be an elder in my church. And so I have to figure out how to live with this. And that's sort of how life works. and so then I do think, again, I was just watching this conversation between Cassidy and Ginger Bill, and I listen to Ginger Bill, and he's in that process. I mean, he knows a ton of physics. He knows a ton of science. He's a very smart guy, and he's figuring out life. And so, yeah, I think issues like, well, here's a funny thing. So, do I think the physicality and historicity of the resurrection is integral to Christianity? Yes. Do I do I think I believe that as much as I should? No. Why? Because I watch my own self emotionally.
Well, what do you
And
mean by that? Sorry, Paul. What do you mean believe that as much as I should? Do you mean like like your confidence that it happened isn't as high as it should be, or do you mean like as frequently, like like you don't think about that belief enough, or like I'm not quite sure. Yeah,
I
what do you mean?
I think, John Calvin has this great line, to the degree that we worry, we doubt God. Okay, now what does he mean? Existence of God? No. It's much more of a, look at a jealous um spouse. What's going on with that jealous spouse? That jealousy or a clinginess or an insecurity betrays a belief which is only partly propositional but much more relational. And so when I say I don't believe in the resurrection sufficiently, it's not that I don't have propositions that I can't somehow defend. It's that um, it's that the complex way in which this thing we use belief, the word belief, to describe, isn't probably as built into me as deeply as it should.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Like it built, do you, so yeah, like built into you as deeply
Okay,
as
so
it
let's say
should.
the government, well, I don't know,
Yeah.
and I don't want you. Let's say the prime minister makes a declaration about a COVID lockdown. And let's say you voted for this prime minister's party and you're a big fan, but you've got questions. It's that kind of dissonance. And then you decide, or let's say, you know, you're a big supporter of the lockdown and you're going to follow it to the letter of the law, but you just really needed to go out to a pub. And so, one evening you said,
Okay.
screw it. I'm going to go out with my friends and we're not going to wear masks and we're going to violate this thing. Do you believe in the prime minister? I mean, it's that way in which these um so there's different kinds of knowing, and this is what gets into this truth thing too, because an arrow can be true, a spouse can be true, a proposition can be true. We're using that same word in different ways, and I think we navigate some of that. So this matter of believing is a much more thing than whether you put a multiple choice thing in front of me and says, Jesus left footprints in the ground when he walked out of the tomb. Check. I, how does that? I mean, I've had many people say to me, okay, let's say Jesus did rise from the dead. So what? That's a really good question.
Well, for
Because,
Christianity, that would be really important, right? If Jesus did rise from the
well,
dead,
there's
like because
lots of Christians out there that are sort of vague on it, and they might say yes or they might back away, but it isn't integrated into their life. I mean, again, think about in a spousal relationship that you hand, oh, I don't know, or maybe just a romantic relationship. Let's say you're not married, but you sign over all of your, if you had a lot of money, you give your car keys, when you give your car keys to one of your children,
Right.
There's,
I've
does
never
my
done that,
child
but
know how to
yeah, I get what you mean.
drive?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
And life is much more like that than
Right.
a multiple choice question.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I still think like I think like you could say what's going on there. For example, um, like you're going to make a decision, say that's based off of like an inference from other facts. So like you know, like my child has passed their driving test, for example, like is going to weigh pretty heavily in that, like however your brain's making that inference, or you know, like the car's got a flat tire or they're not insured on it, they're going to be like important considerations as well. You know, has it just snowed the night before and there's black ice? So I still think you're sort of making a decision based on reasons. So like if you're to use that analogy as like symmetric to like living the Christian lifestyle or whatever, or living as if Jesus rose from the dead and is God, and all those sorts of things. It's like you're still going to make that decision based on reasons, right? Like you're not going to want to say it's just this sort of random decision. And I think it's hard to say, you know, is there a space in between like I'm making this choice based on no reasons whatsoever, or I'm making it for reasons, like because I think it's true or because I think it's really useful for me to live this way or something, but some kind of compelling reason to act that way.
Well,
Is that
I look at this question. I say, how many people in the West right now don't understand that they would be in better health if they ate better, slept right, and exercised, or even just quit smoking?
right?
And then you say, you can sit down with someone and say, do you think that cigarette habit is good for you? And what happens? They know. They don't need, it's not a matter of evidence, but in terms of the nuts and bolts decisions of their life, it's complex. They say, no, cigarette smoking isn't good for me, but, and then they'll usually say, well, my father was in good health and I feel fine. And the truth is that part of what they're doing with their cigarette smoking is they're managing their anxiety. That's what they're doing. That's what
Right.
nicotine does. And I meet overweight doctors, psychologists. I don't, sometimes therapists are some of the most screwed up people I know, and they got into it because they wanted to
Yeah,
learn.
yeah,
So this is how people are. and
yeah.
and people are not computational machinery. When you program a computer and it runs code, there's a code like aspect to us, but we are running so much code on so many different levels. Much of this code simply inherited that we are completely unaware of. So these matters are complex, and many people, you know, many people grow, you know, are the things that we believe are so much of it is simply inherited by our context. I mean, if I grew up in a Muslim country, would I be a Muslim apologist? Um, you know,
Yeah.
5 generations ago, my ancestors on my father's line were Jews and they were butchers and rabbis. And here I am, a Dutch Calvinist. Well, how did that happen? Well, lots of stuff happened.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that evidence and rationality are uninvolved, but this gets into Ian McGilchrist territory where we have these two hemispheres of the brain, and some of the better science, at least right now, appears to say that our limbic systems, our intuitive systems, are the ones driving the elephant, and the rider on top of the elephant is chatting away, trying to make us look good. And I think there's a whole lot of truth to that. And so a lot of life is trying to make peace between the elephant and the rider, but most of it is trying to make peace between the other elephants in our herd.
Do you think though, in the case of like the smoker, um, you know, you'd probably try and convince them why it's in their best interests to quit smoking, right? You wouldn't sort of just expect them to see that you didn't smoke and then just choose that because that's what you believe or something. Like, you know, like you'd want to say, I don't know, maybe you take a different approach, but I think that I'd want to say at least, well, for example, there's a really high likelihood in your like demographic that, you know, you'll die in the next 20 years if it, you know, depending on their age or whatever, if you continue smoking, and you want to, you know, see your kids get married or something like that, and that would be far better than this habit that you enjoy. And so there's a good reason for, like, I'd want to give them reasons, and I'd expect them, if those you know, like they might say, well, actually that fact, Nathan, you've just made that up, you don't know the statistics, they actually say this, there's a really low probability I'm going to die from it. And so and that, you know, like you'd want them to make, would you want them to make decisions in accordance with those sorts of reasons that they came across?
Well, it's sort of what that pastor did to you. And one of the things you learn, again, in this profession, people imagine you stand up in front and say, well, this is a pastor and he's reading from the Bible and it's the word of God, and so I'm going to listen to him and I'm going to believe him. People just don't work that way. And every time, you know, you go get a checkup, if you go to a doctor at all. Another things that I've recognized is a lot of people who don't take care of themselves don't go to the doctor either. Why don't they go to the doctor? Because when they go to the doctor, you're going to step on the scale and the doctor's going to say, you really need to lose 20 pounds. And the doctor's going to go through a checklist. Do you drink? Yes or no? How much? Do you smoke? Yes or no? And the doctor, every time you go into that doctor's office, that doctor, here's a medical professional, yada, 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 you know, but that's not how people work. You don't talk
Yes, yeah.
people in and out of things. And same thing happens with, you know, one of your friends falls in love with someone that you and probably the whole friend circle knows this is a bad thing. Go ahead and tell that person who's fallen in love, you really shouldn't be going out with this person. Yeah, try it. See how that goes. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So people just don't work that way. So then as a pastor, you begin to say, okay, now these people, they're not going to listen to me. Why aren't they going to listen to me? Well, there's whole lots of reasons, because, you know, I deal with a lot of homeless people, people with mental illness. Well, what's my goal then for them? I can talk to them, and we're all a little bit mentally ill, truth be told. I can talk to them, and what I find is that long term, what is influence made up of? It's usually made up of trust, and that trust really involves, how much does this person really care for me? Do they really care for my long-term best interest, or do they have an agenda, a religious agenda, a political agenda? Maybe they just get off on getting people off smoking. Okay, that's an agenda. It's a pretty good agenda, but it's a really weird thing in people. And you notice this with, you know, someone, let's say, who's a woman who's just a drop dead gorgeous woman, and all the guys want her. What do they always say? I don't want someone who wants me because I'm hot. I want someone who wants me for me. And then you have to pause and ask yourself, what is that me she's talking about? Because she has a sense that there's something to her that, well, sure, she's hot, but, you know, she wants people to recognize her sense of humor. Well, it's quite likely the ugly girl has a better sense of humor, because she's developed that all the way along to cope. She couldn't ride on her beauty. I mean, we're so complex this way. And yet our language and our actions betray a truth a little bit deeper than a lot of this stuff that resides on the surface.
I definitely agree that we're not purely rational. And, you know, like a book I read this year that was really good about the psychology of a lot of belief formation and the ways that we sort of use reasoning heuristics and biases, was a book by a guy called Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
Um, But at least one of his main points across that book is that one of the ways that we can avoid these sort of common biases in reasoning, these sort of common mistakes, is actually by being aware of them. So, for example, like something called like an effect heuristic, which is like when you think of an event, you only sort of recall what you've got access to in your memory. So say if it's like doing the washing up with your partner or whatever, you're going to remember like all the times that you've done it and none of the times that they've done it. And so you're going to think, well, I always do this and you never do. And now in relationships where both partners were aware of this heuristic, they actually had like less conflict over these issues, for example. Or there was another one, like regression to the mean with for example, if you imagine like a line on a graph like this, and someone has just had like a really poor performance down here, well, the chances are the next time, just because of regression to the mean, that the next time it's going to be a slightly better. And if they've done exceptional, it's going to be slightly worse. And so people form beliefs like every time someone does really bad, I shout at them and they do better the next time or something.
Yeah.
Or every time someone does really good, I give them praise, but it doesn't work. They do worse. So they form like, well, actually, the best thing to do is always to shout at someone and like teach it. And it turns out the best evidence shows that isn't the best way of like teaching someone a skill, but the instructors form these like fallacious beliefs based upon these like biases of reasoning again. But when you start to sort of talk about these biases of reasoning, it helps people to sort of bypass them. Not bypass it. It helps people to sort of address if they're using them in a particular context in like forming beliefs. And then I think, I mean, like especially when it comes to like religious beliefs, say, or any kind of like belief that's quite foundational to like the rest of the web of beliefs that someone has. I agree that no one's going to just like, I don't think anyone's going to like agree with the first two premises of the Kalam and go all of a sudden, God exists and start acting and believing in a completely different way or something. But something I do think that can happen is like if somewhere a belief that is to do with Christianity or to do with atheism or whatever gets in there amongst the web of beliefs, it causes like a type of cognitive dissonance, and then that forces you. It's like an itch you've got to scratch, kind of thing. It forces you to then look at the beliefs around that and decide, well, that one that doesn't sit with the rest of them, is that one true or false? Or do I discard that? Do I keep that? Well, okay, I've got to keep that one. I can't. There's nothing I can do about it. So now what do I do about these other beliefs it's networked with? And then that's how belief revision, I think, occurs across like the whole system, as it were.
Well, our beliefs are not volitional, and that's another key part. We don't, especially for a lot of deep beliefs, we don't choose them. They are and that's a really important thing just in terms of our own survival. If you walk out into the street and say, I choose not to believe there's a garbage truck doing 40 miles an hour towards me in the middle of the road. Right. That's a, if we would not live long if our beliefs were subject to our volition. So then we get into the question of, okay, if we want better beliefs, we're going to have to mold them and shape them. And this gets into some of the Jonathan Haidt stuff. We're going to have to train the elephant, which means we're probably not going to be able to get there directly. We're going to have to get there indirectly. And I find this all the time with people. If you want to quit smoking, it's not a matter of, I believe smoking is bad for me. Well, that might be part of the decision matrix in order to quit smoking, but all that you're going to have to do to relieve yourself of this habit and retrain all of the stuff inside of you and all of your anxiety mechanisms and all of the habits that you've picked up with smoking, that's going to take a process. It's going to take a process over time, because in a sense, a lot of these chemicals that mess us up, these are time shortcuts. I mean, instead of developing the capacity to do something, we've just taken a chemical and had a particular experience. So belief is a similar thing. And part of what we're immersed in is that the menu of options is limited by decisions that were made centuries ago with respect to us. The menu of belief possibilities that each of us really are really in play for us has been constricted by the decisions of our ancestors. And so we've got that in play as well. And even say reading a book like Daniel Kahneman's book, well, why would you believe something that's written on dead trees and mass produced with a name on the front and PhD? Oh, those three letters make it more believable or less believable. And I think Daniel Kahneman is exactly right. And I found that, after I haven't read the whole book, but I've read some of the book, and after reading it and thinking on it, I've had a lot of those. Says, yeah, that's really true. Thinking slow is important. And but at the same time, then I have to also ask the question, okay, I have this vision in my mind of the good, and I want to use this technique to sort of mold myself into that vision in my mind of the good. Well, at some point I'm going to have to ask myself, where did that idea come from? And again, I find it's all around me. It's but we seldom ask those deep questions because life is so short and it comes at it so fast. What we work off of generally are our first drafts that have been built into us by our parents, by the people we have shared our life with, and also by the decisions made of people, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations behind us. So it's a it's a complex business that we're in. And so that's why I'm always a little skeptical of a lot of the direct, immediate approaches to how people actually live their lives.
Mm. Yeah, I think I agree. We can't like choose the vast majority of our sort of beliefs. Like, if I try to sort of convince myself that I'm a fish or something, or like I don't have a right hand, then I guess it's. I hope I don't know how it looks for you if it's either, but like if I try and convince myself that I don't have a right hand, I just sort of can't do it. But I guess like so something like earlier in this year, for example, like I don't think I had a belief about whether root two is a number or not, or something like that. But then by coming across various proofs that there is no number root two by like Euclid or something, that then sort of forces me to that conclusion. Like it's not that it's not that I just randomly sort of had to convince myself and will myself that that's true, but it's in that like following the content of the argument through, there just wasn't anything I could do other than get to that conclusion. And then with that knowledge, I was just like, well, I can't convince myself this isn't true now unless I show it isn't somehow, like unless I deal with those underlying reasons. And I think that's what goes on in dialogue as well. Like with the smoker, for example, you're going to give the best reasons you can, and you're going to hope that sort of puts a belief in there that maybe causes some cognitive dissonance with the other beliefs that are going to, and then they're probably going to do some rationalizing about, well, actually, I'd enjoy smoking more than going to my daughter's wedding or something. But you're going to hope that in that process, it sort of resolves with them forming some new beliefs. So I'm going to smoke far less, maybe, is like yeah.
But your life, even just the portions that we spoke about today, you have ample material to look at yourself and say, okay, well, I was in this point and I made these, and your belief wasn't disingenuous. You
Mm.
felt the belief, you felt it strongly, and then
Yeah.
you were surrounded by a group of people that reinforced that belief, and then there was dissonance, and the dissonance was among some pretty important things in your life, and so then you changed your belief. And even with respect to your career, where, okay, well, now, someone might say, well, you need to eat, you need shelter. Computer, IT jobs can be very lucrative. If you decide to make this a career, you could have money and access and travel and a bunch of those good things. And, it could be that a very pragmatic person could sit down and say, Nathan, this philosophy business, really? I mean, I'll tell you, you want to, you know what, you want to know how many people out there have PhDs in philosophy and theology. And, even myself as a pastor, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I was thinking, maybe I should get a PhD. And I looked at it. I also had 5 kids, and it was like, okay, I could spend 30, 40, 50 grand and 5 years getting a PhD. And if in fact I could land a teaching job in a seminary, I would make less money than I make working in this podunk little church, and so, but there's something in you that says, no, I there's an aspiration in you that wants, that not only wants to know things, but wants to become something. You want to become a human being that has an understanding of the world at a deeper level, and is in conversation with people who have been dead, over 2,000 years, and wants to not only, I don't just want to have an app that runs good on your phone. I want to talk to a human being and be engaged in this amazing thing called life. I don't want to just reprogram smartphones. I want to be a part of programming people for the better, which is ideally what philosophy does, where it's not only things not only run on the smartphone better, but the world runs better. In order for the world to run better, all of these things about realism and idealism and, Cartesian dualism and all of this stuff, it's helpful if we sort this stuff out. And we don't even obviously know why, because, some things wind up being dead ends, but you don't know it for 200 years after you're long dead. But there's something inside of you that knows that. And it's not something that, okay, Nathan, give up this philosophy garbage and, stop being on YouTube talking about religion and philosophy, and just be a better coder so you'll make more money. Something inside of you says, I understand the rationality of it. I ain't going there. Something else inside of me wants something else. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, like I say, I do agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying. I think it's just maybe like, like you kind of framing it as if I sort of um know something, or like from the worldview I think you're coming from, I think you're framing it like I'm embedded in this, this pattern that's trying to find potentiality and stuff like that. And I think maybe I'd describe all that as like, well, I just enjoy it more. Like, I'd say, well,
Why?
actually,
Why do you enjoy it more? What's that? I mean, that's data. Where's that
right.
coming from?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's different ways you could like describe that, right? So like from my point of view, it might be I enjoy it more because what I find that when I'm reading these books and engaging in these discussions, I feel more pleasure than when I'm writing code or something. I guess you could probably like describe it maybe from the outside or something like you you could describe it from the outside. Well, just at that kind of level as well. You could say, well, because a potential objection to that is like, well, what if the thing that brings me the most pleasure in that way is skinning cats or something like that, right? And you're going to say, well, that's a problem. So
Unless cats
um
need to be skinned because your community uses cat skins for.
but like in general, I suppose it's sort of like I can balance those things up, and I can say, well, actually, as well, in studying philosophy, maybe some of these ideas might help people figure out more true beliefs. Maybe there's like teaching people as a career or something, and that's valuable in this way or that. So there isn't like there isn't any particular harm done to someone else, and so that's why it would be a good thing. It's not, it's not objectionable for me to pursue it if I enjoy it. There's no like defeater to my enjoyment because it's sort of so then and maybe you could weigh that up against the other model of like a career in software, and you could say, well, actually, I'm not actually a utilitarian, but I'm just going with this you could say the maximum the amount of pleasure that people will get from me going down that avenue isn't as much as it would be from the other one, because I'd be unhappy the whole way. No one really cares about clicking on this button on the web page. It's not going to do that much good for the world. So, and it's just the person who's going to get the most pleasure is sort of like some guy in middle management I'll never meet who's and, um, so like that. I'd be more inclined, I think, to describe it in those terms than like I guess like the kind of Jordan Peterson, like you can be more than who you are, and manifesting potentiality in the maybe like Jungian archetypes of the hero journey. So like I'm not sure that I mean, it could be the case that those things are playing a role, but like I can't see why I would want them as part of my explanation, because they don't seem to like they don't seem to be playing a role to me.
Well, so you're obviously deriving some kind of joy by reading philosophy, and
Yeah.
probably a majority of human beings walking around this world would only read it if it was assigned to them because they think they'll get a degree and maybe a better
Right.
job. And so there's clearly something within you that's drawing you, and and that's not dissimilar to the person who won't give up smoking. Now, I would say they're
Yes.
going in
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
directions. There is, I think people who start smoking, I remember, when I was in high school, I didn't smoke, but I had friends who did. And why did they start smoking? They had a vision of the world that involved they had a different identity with a cigarette in their hand. And yeah. So and this is again where you get into this question of the master and the emissary. There's something inside of you that is drawing you. Now, how to articulate that, how to account for that. It's really hard.
But it's also like what I it's difficult because I like if you're saying that something that I do, for example, is like make future model predictions, say about like like how events might play out if I make certain decisions, and then I choose the one that I think is the best for me. Um, like that's one way of sort of describing it, and then you could and I think or you could say, and actually all of those descriptions, what they are is like they're reducible to like the amount of like secretion of a certain neurotransmitter or the amount of receptors for it. So like I'm not saying it is but like that might be one option someone goes with. But I don't know if you're doing this, but you might be saying, well, this like being drawn towards like a vision of the future or something is like a metaphysical reality or something, and that's the thing that I'm kind of, I suppose, objecting to if that's in there in the description, because I'm not sure why I would think that when like that explanation would have all the same things as like the naturalist explanation, that like there's a brain with receptors and chemicals and like whatever a mind is, it's making this model of the future and deciding between them, but then also the added complexity of whatever it is for there to be like a sort of archetype in there of things happening, unless an archetype just is like it's nothing more than a name that, and but what we mean by that name is like reducible to those natural things. Like, do you see what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. When people sit down and watch a movie on Netflix, they most don't have most have very little understanding of the servers, the compression software, the IP protocols, the software in the router, the technology in their OLED screen or their LED screen. And you could sit there and you could focus on that level. And if you did, the patterns on the screen would be completely inconsequential. Nobody lives that way. Why not? The patterns on the screen are enormously consequential. And, we're doing it right now via Zoom. And it's all the immaterial relational content that we are conveying back and forth that is meaningful to us. Now, obviously, this is all interfacing with chemicals in our brain, and this. I mean, the relatively the complex electronic facilities that we're using to afford this communication right now is nothing compared to the mechanisms that are going into what you and I as physical organisms are doing to actually sustain this. But the strange thing about this is that the part that we're really eager about is in fact the immaterial relational story aspect of it.
right.
And that's just a wholly bizarre reality. And this is where Jordan Peterson's point lands hard. We act as if this is important. Now, you can sit on Discord servers and Zoom and do this all day and think, wow, it's amazing. I'm talking to a guy in the UK. But which conversations do you choose? You choose the ones that are meaningful to you. Well, what on earth is involved in that meaning business? Because, it's the same with, you can sit in a room and look at books that have coding development content in them, or you can read, Immanuel Kant, and somehow Kant turns a light on for you that the coding textbook didn't. What's with that? This is eminently strange. And
I think this is maybe where the difference is, though. I think I'm saying I can't. I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's like, so there's the natural sort of layer of reality wherein there's things happening, but there's also like another layer of reality as well, like maybe a different metaphysical substance of like meaning or something that's along. I don't really understand.
Right.
So that's for you to maybe explain. But I'm saying I can't see any reason for saying that thing is there as well, because I think that all of those things can be explained under naturalism in a way that accounts for all the sort of data points. So I can't see, like, if you're saying there is this extra thing, I can't see what explanatory work it's doing, because the naturalist can like account for say why I might find certain outcomes more appealing than other outcomes, say, or why I might have. I mean, I'm not saying I've solved the hard problem of consciousness here or anything, but I say, like, the naturalist can sort of offer, I'd say, better explanations for why the brain is like involved in us interpreting things as meaningful or something than
and why the computer is processing this Zoom call. You say, well, the computer is processing the Zoom call because I'm providing electricity and we have an IP connection and the CPU is doing its work. That's a why. But
that's one way of describing it.
That's one way of describing it. But the why of what we're having this conversation for, all of this electronic technology, you and I, for some strange reason, have colonized all of this material physical world to achieve an outcome that neither of us is fully understanding of, yet we're seeking it. And we have a sense of if this is a good conversation and if this isn't a good conversation. And if we were to describe what this would be, Well, we'd probably be able to give reasons, just like the split brain people. You can split the brain and one decide, and then you ask the other to make up a story, says, yeah, we're doing this because. It's like, well, you're not doing that because. That isn't the because, but there is a because somewhere going on. And that's not only a difficult question, but that's the joy of why we do these things.
Hmm.
And
I think you're saying
I
the
think
sorry,
actually the substance, I think actually part of the philosophical problem we have put ourselves into is that we keep thinking in terms of substances, and when we say the word substance, we can't help but imagine some kind of matter. And I think the evidence suggests that something else is moving the matter, just like our desire to talk with each other this morning moved all the pixels to afford this conversation. Now, what I'm saying is that, why is this? I'm not exactly sure, but I know it's governing the electronics we're using right now.
So like just there where you said something else is moving the matter, for example.
Yeah.
Um, so let's say if we had like a closed system with me in it, and if something else was moving the matter, would we expect the total energy then of that system to increase to more than what it was before? If something else outside of the system was
Are you measuring energy?
yeah, so let's say this room that I'm in with me in it is just like somehow boxed off from the universe, and we measure the total energy of everything in it, and then I make a decision to sort of like run around in a circle. Is the total energy in the room higher or lower on that view that something else is moving it?
So you're basically setting up sort of a buffered self experiment, that the question is something is something else coming in. I
Hmm.
think it was a David Eagleman book on the brain. I mean, part of the question is always, where's this stuff that's, where's this stuff coming from? And I think that's exactly the problem, that we're using the word stuff, because every time I move my hand, there's and I just had a conversation with John Vervaeke and Mary on this. Is it a story that's moving my hand? Um, you might be interested. I don't know if you've read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles.
I know of the content of it. I haven't read it
Yeah,
properly
you
though.
might
So.
take a look at it if you're interested. And because it's a very hard thing to sort of explain, yet all of us do it every day. Why? It's, and we might say, well, I want to talk to Nathan because I'm tribal and I want to get him back into the Christian tribe. Oh, okay. That's probably rolling around in my head somewhere. I want to talk to Nathan because we've had a conversation before, and I like him. He's a fun guy to talk to. He's an interesting guy. He has an interesting story. That's rolling around in my head. But the part of the problem is that these causes stack up, and they just keep stacking. You and I are both part of two different cultures, and our cultures are speaking through us. We're part of different families, and those are speaking through us. These things, these things don't account for everything, but they certainly are parts of the picture. But the truth is, you and I right now, if we were to say, okay, we're going to sit down and for the next hour, we are going to try to exhaust the potentiality of the mechanisms and causes going into even just this conversation. Um, we might run out of ideas in an hour, but the truth is, with enough work, none of us have life enough to exhaust those causes in an hour, because there are just so many different layers of analysis you can bring to bear on almost any different thing. So then the question is, okay, what is the thing that brought about this conversation? Was it, you dropping into the Discord server and kind of nobody knowing what to do? Is it the conversation you had with Luke? Is it, I mean, what's driving this thing? And I don't think who in this world could provide the answer to that question? My answer would all be balled up in all of the stuff that's going into this. Your answer would too. Neither is there an authority. And so to try to reduce everything to one layer of analysis, well, you can try it, but I don't find it to be a helpful game, because again, what is probably driving us more is we have a fairly fuzzy vision of an ideal or a good thing that I'm involved with, that you're involved with, that the whole world is involved with, and somehow that is drawing us towards itself. That's the best I can do. But what that thing is, people have said God. But, one of the things I wanted to talk about, when we say Jesus exists and God exists, even though we're using the same word, and even though in a Christian frame, Jesus is God, there's a lot of difference between those two sentences. And partly because of how that word functions, the word God. And so I don't know. And I'm, someone could dismiss this conversation as, here a Christian minister is trying to bring a young man back into the fold. Oh, okay. Or, I can offer another 10 explanations for it right now. Probably all of them with a degree of plausibility and truth. That doesn't exhaust what's happening right now on either side.
Yeah. I think there are like some claims though that could be like ruled out. So like in the case of like to say that something else is moving me or animating me, and then something else beyond the physical. So then if we were to look at like me in a room and moving around, and the total energy of the system didn't increase, then that would count against that claim, right? That would show that at least that couldn't be true.
Well, how are you using the word energy? I really don't understand
like
that.
Like as in joules of energy, the total. I think joules is like a measurement of the total vibration of all the atoms and bonds and so forth. Or
why that and not water vapor?
Because joules is the standard measurement of energy in physics.
If you play 2 4K videos on Netflix and you say the energy is the same, does that mean the movie is the same?
No, it depends if it's what you'd mean by the same, but like it could be the same movie in that like they could both be Harry Potter, right? But they're both different instances. So it's like in the same way that you can have like multiple chairs, right? And they're all referred to by the token chair.
Mm-hmm. But that gets into my question about energy, because what is energy measuring? We're using, whether you and I were sitting here trading stock tips or pandemic conspiracy theories rather than talking about religion and philosophy, would the energy be any different?
I mean, it could be. Like, it might be that, for example, because I think about religion a lot, that a greater amount of my brain gets engaged or something when I think about it. And that means that, like, I convert more ATP to ADP or something and release more something like in one sense, like that third person description of what's going on could be different, I think. Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like this question of energy as such tells us much interesting about what we find interesting and why.
Well, do you think well, I think it's interesting, for example, like whether or not people are purely reducible to matter, or whether there's like something more, is there like a Cartesian soul, or is there like vital force or something that like animates my body, right? And then it's like, well, how could I figure out if that's true or not in the world? And then I guess I think one of a good way to do that is like through science and experimentation, or through like reasoning philosophy is another like good way to think about those things.
Well, I don't, I'm not, lately I've been less and less, I don't know a ton about it, but I think a model that imagines the soul being a substance doesn't help us talk about what's going on, because I'm not going to in any way dispel any of the physical or psychological or chemical mechanisms that have brought both of us to this point right
Right.
now. Just like I'm not interested in dispelling any of the physics that's involved in this book right on the shelf right here. But
Right.
the part that it's playing in the entire story still stands. There doesn't have to be another mechanism. And this is where I get into, in Christianity, the God of redemption is the God of creation. And so you get these weird sayings like, when the time had fully come. Well, what does that mean? That means that in some ways in the Christian story, the birth of Jesus Christ was set up in Genesis 1, which is basically what John 1 says. In other words, now you might have some, dreaded Calvinist flashbacks. Questions of freedom or determinism, these are difficult questions. And it's always funny to me when people get nervous about Calvinist determinism, but jump right into Sam Harris's determinism. And I tend to look at these things as sort of different perspectives on the story. But I'm not a dualist in the sense that, let me say it this way. All of we cannot help but use descriptions of things. They're always descriptions, but all descriptions presuppose a certain perspective. And so understanding how Christianity conceives of Jesus exists and God exists in two different frames is important for understanding that there aren't any cheats in terms of who you or I are with respect to the way the world unfolds. And in fact, if you read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, which is a very interesting book, he basically makes the argument that rationality as we understand it is in some ways evidence for God shining on us, because it's a weird break in a mechanistic picture for us to decide, I am going to purposefully talk to Nathan this morning because I have goals and ambitions that are not adequately described materially, just like, let's say, the checksum of a Netflix movie is not, of the MP4 file, is not an adequate description of the plot.
I think I see what you're saying, and I think this is an objection that's similar to like when I talked to Cliff and Stuart at the Ask Cliff channel, and he said something like like love isn't just matter and motion or whatever. But the thing is that, so someone like me, I guess, isn't saying that love is matter and motion. It's I think this is like a kind of straw man of the materialist position, where someone will come along and say like, oh, if naturalism is true, and I don't think you've explicitly done this, by the way, so I'm not like, but I think what some people immediately will jump to when they think about this is like, well, if naturalism is true, then love is a potato. But love clearly isn't a potato, so naturalism just can't be true. Like love is the firing of neurons, but love can't be the firing of neurons. It clearly isn't that. therefore naturalism isn't true. But the problem is that what the naturalist isn't necessarily making that claim. What they're saying is that like a third person description of what's going on might be that it's this particular firing of neurons in humans or something like that, because I don't want to make like a type identity claim, but so this type of neuron firing in humans is love, for example. But then what it's like to be those neurons firing is love. So it's not, you know, like, so it's to say that what love is like this is something it's like to be. It's like to be those neurons, and it supervenes on the natural in a way that there couldn't be a change in the love without a change in the natural as well. And I think that like makes sense as an explanation. It also would make sense of like why are there these two types of descriptions, like private descriptions, what it's like to be me, what it's like to smell things, what it's like to be part of a narrative I tell myself about myself, but also why other people, when they look at me and don't have access to that, can like say, oh, you know, like Nathan is this tall and weighs this much too much because he's eaten too much over Christmas. But
Right.
like
what could an autopsy on either of our bodies actually tell the doctor about our lives? You know, and it gets into this again, the strange question of the hot girl that all the guys want to be with. And someone can easily say, well, look at the symmetry of her face, look at the beauty of her hair, look at the curves of her body. And she says, I want someone to love me for me. Where's me in that picture? And, you know, and I look at my own relationship with my wife. I remember the moment I laid eyes on my wife the first time. It was like, bang, you know, and yeah, chemistry and psychology and, you know, all of that stuff. And so my wife was, you know, a very beautiful young woman, and it was very easy. Uh-oh, my camera's clicking out. And it was very
that's a cool
easy.
no signal thing.
Yeah, I'll let my camera
rejig.
It's got to cool down a little bit. So that's one thing. But then when, you know, we're married a number of years and the marriage is difficult and the relationship is hard, and there are things that you know, things that I obviously couldn't know about my wife right away, things that I would learn about my wife and my wife would learn about me when, you know, oh, we had sex all these times already. So, you know, that's not new anymore. And we have children and what keeps me then in the marriage? That's where you get into a little bit of rationality. Well, is it rational? Well, maybe it'd be rational when this marriage is no longer, you know, giving me what I had hoped it had given me, which on a very surface level is, you know, she should adore me and do things for me and make me feel good about myself, yada, yada, yada. And maybe now this marriage means, and now suddenly, well, what are the vows that I made? Well, where are these vows? Well, we wrote them down on paper. Maybe in a fit of anger, we burned the paper. You know, it just, so you can tell that story from below, but that's not how we live. And so accounting
I agree though. I agree. Everything on my, like, I'm saying, but I think there are some points, so like, you know, you could point out maybe some disagreement. There would be some disagreements between the views, and that maybe those may be things that, like, where Christianity, you could say, you could show it as being different, because maybe when you're like so when you're talking about your vows there, I suppose, like, the way that you view them is almost like a contract that also God is involved in, right? Whereas my view on that situation is going to be that this is like a ritual that kind of people have because they kind of like it and it signifies something like an important commitment to raise children or something.
Right.
But then maybe when people, you know, like once those kids are raised, they might agree that it's actually healthier for them both to, go their separate ways or have different partners or something like that. Whereas maybe the Christian would say, well, actually, there's a metaphysical difference in reality because there's this vow thing, which is like a contract between it. So now that actually, like being aware of, because it's true that reality is different in that way, we're going to behave in this different way.
And because it could also be, and this is sort of a Jordan Peterson move, it could also be that psychologically, John Vervaeke made the comment that, they've done experiments of people with, with the honor system, like you take a cup of coffee, put in a little bit of coins. If they put up a picture of eyes in front of the little cup where people are supposed to make their contribution, they think more. They're being watched. You're really hard pressed to find to find a more efficient way than God to boil into the fact that if my wife and I had called it quits on our marriage after 7 years, we now couldn't enjoy what we're enjoying after 32 years of having 5 children at home for the holidays.
I mean, like
that gets, now I'm not saying that, every marriage should, I'm not saying that nobody should divorce. I've seen plenty of marriages that probably shouldn't have started to begin with, and things were better after the divorce. But in the middle of it, you don't know that. And so what tends to happen, even from below, is that over time, humanity has developed stories and compression systems that have afforded advantages via those systems, which again, just like with the checksum in the Netflix movie, you're not going to distill into, bits and bytes on a hard drive. There's the story layer that is involved. And well, how do we actually as human beings engage in that story layer? And, and then we get to the question of what mental pictures are actually moving in our brains. Now, this is where theology gets important, because again, when I say God, a lot of people think of a super thing up in the sky. And that's not, I don't believe that's what the Hebrews were talking about. Neither did the Stoics, for that matter. So this stuff gets deep. And why is it that if you run the program without those 3 little words, God, people don't stay married as long? Just like if you don't put that little thing up.
Yeah.
But then you can push that back another layer and say, well, what is the good? And this stuff just keeps going. And at some point, at every moment in your life, you have to make a decision. How are you going to live? And that boils down to, am I going to study philosophy or computer science? Am I going to stand up in front of friends and family and make a commitment to this person and come within a reasonable hell or high water, try to make that marriage work, not only for me, but for children and for her and for the community, and even for descendants 2 or 3 generations from now. And as human beings, we can't do that math. And that's why what we do is we engage in systems that have, in fact, crunched math for centuries before us. And well, but those systems don't work if you actually don't inhabit them fully. So then you have to say, well, the resurrection of Jesus Christ doesn't actually help me with worry unless I have a sense that I can now be committed to suboptimal relationships and situations in my life, which are good for my children and good for my parish and good for the world. And I will take the sacrifice. That is actually the definition of love. I will take the hit in my life and my enjoyment and my well-being so that my children and my spouse and my neighborhood and the future can flourish. I can only do that if I have a sense that someday, who knows how long, I will come out of a tomb and I will reign with Christ. And someone might say, well, you sure can't prove that. No, I can't. Not in the sense that I can prove I'm holding a a cell phone stand. But what I can show you is how I care for the homeless people, and how I'm committed to my children, and how I'm committed to my wife. And you might say, boy, but that takes a lot of internal sacrifice. I say, yeah, it does. But this story affords me the the adrenaline, the commitment, all of these things to do this. And in fact, if I'm embedded in an entire community that statistically is outperforming other communities around me in basic levels of self-sacrifice for the benefit of the world, well, okay. Yeah, can I demonstrate to you that Jesus rose from the dead? Probably not. But I am going to live a life that reinforces it in me, not only for my sake, but for the sake of my children, and for the stranger who's outside my country, and for the entire world. And, that to me is a powerful argument that I tend to find the naturalist story, and it is a story, usually as I feel it working in my heart, it doesn't help me be more self-sacrificial to the homeless, to the stranger, to my children, and to my wife. So that's another layer of analysis that I employ to say, this is not only why I want to be a Christian, but this is why I want to encourage others to be a Christian. And again, embedded in this story, I find it deeply both meaningful and satisfying to look around and say, yeah, can I prove all this? Probably not. Is there mechanisms beneath the surface? Definitely so. But I think this is the best way to live. And so I'm going to do all of the little nitty gritty things to encourage the story in my life and my heart, not only for the meaning, but for the quite obvious welfare of the rest of the world that I see. So sorry for the sermon.
No, it's all right. Don't worry. It's all good. I think just listening, something that I'm thinking that I'd want to say in response is that, or like pretty much everything I think you described there, um, is you can be accounted for in terms of natural causes and natural phenomena, though. And I just can't see, where like metaphysically a God existing is actually doing any explanatory work in um, accounting for how or why any of those things happen. That's like a difficulty for me from my point of view.
Well, if we're doing accounting, you can just, if you want to count things, look at the sustainability and the ability of religious traditions that have pretty durable, crunchy metaphysical beliefs versus the virology of Sunday assemblies. And I mean, for 200 years since Auguste Comte, people have been trying to create a sort of a secular, safe religious movement where, I mean, just do a Wikipedia search of Auguste Comte, the guy who coined the term sociology and really got it going, where we don't need God to sort of bring people together and have them sacrifice for one another. These, even, let's say, say Mormonism, which is a religious community whose whose origin story I am deeply skeptical of. I find Mormons to be lovely, good people. And one of my favorite homeless people is a deeply committed Mormon who's also a drug user. And
Right.
and he'll be preaching to me via his Mormon things. And in the past, he would come into my church because he was banned from the Mormon church. And at the end of my sermons, he said, "You got it all wrong, because it's the Garden of Gethsemane, not Golgotha, where the work gets done." And I can talk about all those things.
Yeah.
But if you're just counting noses, the naturalism is a losing bet sociologically in terms of human history. Now, you might find something thrilling about it and want to pursue it and promote it. And, I'm not going to try and snooker you or coerce you or pressure you not to do it. In a sense, all of us have the freedom, and I see it as freedom, to make choices about our lives. Again, we're not choosing our we're not choosing our beliefs volitionally directly, but we do choose the path that the elephant follows. And if you're doing accounting, I would argue, at least my reckoning, religious people, generally speaking, give more money, are happier, generally speaking, do better in marriage. And again, these are statistics broadly. You can, of course, find an atheist over here who is outperforming a Christian over there. But statistically, even someone like Melanie Brewster, who, is a is an atheist by anybody's definition, has to concede it. And so she goes up onto atheist conferences and scolds people to be better atheists by organizing and, not doing what they're doing, not unlike Christian pastors.
If I thought that that naturalism is true, and I knew that Mormonism would be more beneficial to me and to other people around me, would you say I should be a Mormon or a naturalist? Do you think?
Hmm. Um, I don't know if I was giving advice, I'd give you advice of the, I mean, the decisions we make at one level or another tend to be the advice we're giving out to the world, for good and for bad. Uh, would I rather have a naturalist or a Mormon as a neighbor? Probably a Mormon,
Okay.
because there are certain things, and of that, probably a church going Mormon, because just in terms of questioning, I'd say, well, there's some things I can consider that Mormon's going to do. They're probably going to treat their kids pretty well. They're going to have family game night. They're going to, and I might, not agree with what the Mormon brings to the table in terms of their story, but that Mormon is unpacking actually centuries of religious wisdom and deploying it to their family. Now, but at the same time, one of my best friends who was a neighbor for years is a new age dude. He teaches sociology at a local college, but no one could ask for a better neighbor. And, in terms of some of the ways that he's directed his life, I obviously would have my own ideas, but he would have the same things for me. And, you know, my children are going to have to come to terms with all of these questions for themselves. And, as a Christian minister, I share what I got and say, this is my perspective, but I'm not in charge of you
Yeah.
or my neighbor. I am, to a degree, my neighbor's keeper, but also to another degree, I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I don't know if I'm wondering if I should and if like to wrap it up, I should ask like a more light-hearted question, but I can't think of one that isn't like silly. I was going to say like because in Titus 1:13 it says this just randomly came into my head, like it says a Cretan told me this, that all Cretans are liars or something like that. And I was gonna say, and shall we solve that one to wrap it up or something? But I don't. It might be the wrong sort of note.
Well, I'm glad we had this conversation, and I think it was a good conversation. And
Yeah,
if you're
yeah,
comfortable with it, I'd like to share it with others.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
and
I'm
I
happy with
think,
that.
because part of what I do on my channel is I do want to inspire and I do want to provoke sometimes, but I do want us to have better conversations about these things, because we're asking important questions.
Yeah,
And I do believe, you know, you want good things for my life, and I do believe I want good things for your life.
great.
I want to see you succeed and find a vocation that's fulfilling. I want to see you be able to develop a relationship and enjoy, for me, what has been some of the most satisfying things of my life, have children and watch them go out into the world, also some of the hardest.
Yeah,
I do want good things for you, and I think we want good things for each other. And so I think some debate about naturalism versus Christianity and what do we mean by God, and I think all of that is healthy stuff along the way. But I want us to um, I want us to do it as honest people who are talking like people,
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
be able to admit that, yeah, I'm not going to show you a cast of the footprint of Jesus right outside the grave. I don't got that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want me to give a naturalist telling of why I think Christianity is a good way to live, I can do that. And I want to hear you honestly say, I don't believe it. I have a lot of respect for that. And so when someone like Tom Holland says, I'm kind of living into the Christian story, but I don't really, dinosaurs are still in some ways more real to me than God, I'd rather have him tell me that,
Yeah.
and let's talk about it, because that's what's
Yeah.
fun rather than playing games with each other.
Yeah.
So
I actually really, really appreciate that about, like, that you're so willing to like talk to someone like me who isn't agreeing with your point of view, because I've had it with some apologetics like channels, and I know you're like, what you're doing isn't like apologetics explicitly, where I've sort of been like, well, better than say like us making just like random response videos to each other, or random like engaging on Twitter and like getting annoyed because we're constrained by how many characters there are, or wouldn't it be better just to actually like talk about these things?
yeah,
But also, don't we owe it to our audiences in a sense to show what people figuring out these ideas actually looks like, right?
yeah.
Rather than I don't want to be running like the German propaganda ministry for atheism or something like. Yeah, so.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's, and that's what I'm trying to do. Uh, and that's why, the guys at my local meetup, we started the Discord server, and that's why the Randos United channel started, and Cassidy has her own channel now, and we're hoping to compete with porn on YouTube, and have better conversations instead, because
Yeah.
it's more interesting. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
well, thank you, Nathan. It was lovely to talk to you, and I will post this, and I will send you the link. And if you're okay with me sharing it, I'll share it. And I'd love for you to um, please feel free to come by the Discord server. I don't know what happened that day, but to get Job upset, I thought, there's a whole bunch of admins there that might ban somebody, but Job, how does Job get upset? So, but I'd love to, if
I
you
don't know
want to.
who Job is, so I don't.
Oh,
I
okay. Well,
don't.
don't
Yeah,
worry
I don't
about
know
it.
who.
But
Yeah.
if you or anybody who watches your channel want to come over to the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, this is the kind of conversation we're trying to facilitate, where people can, and there's plenty of people in the Discord server who are not Christians. And part of my difficulty there is that a lot are becoming Christians, and so we always need more atheists. Because you can't, what happens in the church often is you wind up talking about a lot of intramural theological things in the church, and
I
there's a
see.
place for
Yeah, and it
that.
becomes removed from what the discussion is in culture. Like it's like an
Yeah,
internal. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
yeah. And so part of my desire is that we continue to be able to have conversations like this, because I find it helpful for me. I mean, you influence me when you and I talk. I hope I influence you. We influence each other,
Yeah.
and it's good. I learn. And so that's what I like. So anyway,
Yeah.
thank you, Nathan.
Cool.
And
Yeah.
we'll talk
I
again
will
some other time.
stop recording on my end as well.